Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I am Ted, your host, and for this lecture we're going to pick right back up where we last left off, discussing the Clinton administration, and in particular the arrival of a new Republican majority in the House of Representatives and the United States Senate during the first Clinton administration. And have we discussed in our last lecture, this new Republican majority was led by Newt Gingrich of Georgia. Gingrich came into office on the heels of his promise of fully prosecuting what he called the chief attributes of his contract with America. Gingrich's and Republicans' election and the groundswell, just landslide, not really landslide, but just this groundswell victory that they had in 1994 was fueled in part by the failure of First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton to successfully prosecute or successfully push for health care reform. The First Lady was a very gifted politician. She had many fine political attributes, but she was not very tactful. She really could not be. She really could not form the type of coalitions needed to ensure the reforms, that the healthcare reforms that she wanted to pursue. She did not have that broad base appeal. She did not have the support base to push anything like that through. And Gingrich, like many other leaders of his day, lacked the give and take of compromise. He could not grasp the compromise nature of politics, the give and take of politics, like James Watt, like First Lady, like First Lady Clinton. He was too confrontational in his dealings with others. He could not understand that to get your objective accomplished, you had to take a very circuitous route. That you had to sort of play the field, so to speak. He had the same problem, the same inability to make alliances that afflicted the First Lady. Gingrich found it difficult to make any headway and carry out his objectives, let alone the long-term project of reducing the federal government operations. The most dramatic development of the Gingrich stewardship was the shutdown of the federal government in the face of Democratic reluctance to accept Gingrich's plan as it is. Gingrich had the federal government closed down briefly in December of 1995 through January of 1996, hoping to make a very dramatic case that the president, through stubbornness, and that the congressional Democrats, through blind intransigency, had conspired to force the government closure. Now, Gingrich was disappointed in the result. Popular opinion swung in favor of the Democrats and against Gingrich, who was derided as both reckless for his endangering of a wide sector of the economy, and just foolhardy and too headstrong to lead the government, to be a leader in the government. Now, it was especially damaging in 1996 because 1996 was an election year and the economy was roaring along. During the 1996 election cycle, Clinton ran for re-election against Bob Dole, Senator Bob Dole of Kansas, and Dole lost handsomely to Clinton. Now, Clinton's second term in office was hamstrung by the Lewinsky affair. Clinton had already been under investigation for his involvement in a fraudulent investment opportunity called Whitewater. The Whitewater affair was being investigated by Ken Starr, who had been appointed special counsel to investigate Whitewater by Congress. And Starr had previously served as the Solicitor General under the previous administration. Now, the Whitewater affair was a complicated business deal that was linked to the collapse of many savings and loans organizations. It was clear that some of the Clintons' money had been involved in this contaminated scheme. What was really not clear was if Clinton, the president, had knowingly defrauded any of the investors of the Whitewater of the Whitewater affair. If he was implicated directly in any of this, that was unclear. Now, during the Whitewater affair, a number of other claims were made against Bill Clinton, but particularly amongst his conduct with women, namely those made by Paula Jones, who had claimed that President Clinton sexually harassed her during his tenure as the governor of Arkansas. While the allegation was being investigated, Clinton started a very rash sexual affair with a young intern named Monica Lewinsky. As stated earlier, Clinton had a habit of extramarital affairs. He was known to have co-opted the Arkansas State Police to help him arrange romantic interludes with women, and Lewinsky herself spoke of the affair with her friends, who in turn leaked the information to the press. Now, once Republican leaders found out, they were delighted. This presented them with another opportunity to embarrass or to attempt to embarrass the president. It did not work out so well. At this point, Newt Gingrich is still the leader of the Republicans in Congress. And Gingrich, while pushing this, was engaged in an affair himself. I want to say it was his third wife. He was having an affair with his future fourth wife. His current wife, Callista, was the mistress. And Gingrich, when it came out, he quickly left office. He resigned from office, and he left office. But he was among the more strident. And this is a very interesting aspect with American politics. You will see somebody, you would know that a politician will be doing something he'll be doing the same morally bankrupt or exercising the same ineptitude of his opponent, and he will be quick to call it his opponent while doing all that he can to shield his own nefarious actions from the spotlight. But the Republican leaders in Congress, they tried to do so. President Clinton, they tried to embarrass him. The president got him verbal reassurances from Lewinsky that she would not disclose the affair to anyone for fear of further damaging his political career. But once she told her friends, the cat was effectively out of the bag. Now, to compound things, Clinton later went on to lie about the affair. First to other politicians, and then to the American public. I can remember as a young man watching President Clinton give this address in which he claimed to have had an affair, any sort of sexual relations with the woman, Miss Lewinsky. I remember as a young boy not watching it, and not really understanding what was happening, but it was an important moment. Like it was on all the major news networks. Clinton, he lied about it, and the denial of the affair led to his impeachment, led to an impeachment trial. The House of Representatives went on to gather evidence. They gathered evidence, they accumulated evidence, and they presented evidence that proved that the affair had indeed occurred. President Clinton then went on TV and gave another speech, this one in August of 1998. On August 17th, 1998, he admitted to the affair. The House of Representatives later introduced articles of impeachment towards President Clinton for obstruction of justice and lying under oath. Those articles passed that December. They voted to impeach him that December on charges of perjury and obstruction of justice for lying under oath and for consorting to persuade others to lie on his behalf. Now, it was a watershed moment in the history of the Republic. For the media to make out what was really going to be journalists for the first time on air giving very frank details about the president's sex life, much less about oral sex or just sex in general. Now, despite the scandals, things looked up for the Democratic Party. The economy was thriving. There was a general consensus that the impeachment wasn't so much a moral outrage, but was politically motivated by the president's enemies, namely Newt Gingrich, who himself had to leave office because of his own affair. It led to a very narrow Democratic victory in the midterm elections. The election and the later acquittal of the president in the Senate sort of ended the threat to the Clinton presidency. It will forever mar his legacy. But for the most part, Clinton was able to finish out his second term without major scandal, without major upheaval. Now, George W. Bush, the eldest son of former President George H.W. Bush, won the next presidential election, and he defeated Al Gore, who was the sitting vice president. Gore has served since 1993. He was sworn in 1993 along with Clinton. He was Clinton's vice president. The election year for 2000 was a very messy affair, one that's still shrouded in controversy. Bush, the younger, won the election, but only after a recount of votes in Florida, where his younger brother John was the then sitting governor. The ballot itself had been confusing, with many Florida voters thinking that they were voting for one candidate when really they had voted for the other candidate. Now, the term "hanging Chad" also rose to prominence during this time because it was because in the process of perforating their ballots, some voters did not make it all the way through, and there were little bits of paper left hanging loose, the hanging Chad. The election dispute persisted until Gore relented in the closing weeks of the Clinton administration. He actually pushed it. This actually became a Supreme Court case. They pushed it that high. Now, sort of switching from politics, the 1990s is also really known as the tech boom area. The early 2000s as well, but mainly the 1990s. The sustained boom of the 1990s did not erase the growing income gap between the wealthiest and the most impoverished Americans. The massive technological revolution that began in the 1980s created a new generation of creative and marketing geniuses who gained the same kind of social standing that the infamous and influential robber barons of the 19th century had. Men such as Bill Gates and Steve Jobs came to be regarded as the second coming of men like John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. The internet boom enabled the new businesses and the public entities to go online, sometimes with unfortunate consequences for consumers. The early move to online or e-commerce was first met with a number of credit card scams, inefficient internet service, inefficient hard technology, and a dramatic over-exaggeration of the market's potential. Still, though, the drive of destiny was great enough that the digital revolution continued, and men like Bill Gates, the head of the gigantic Microsoft corporation, became profusely wealthy. Gates had become the wealthiest man in the world by the end of the century. His personal wealth having been thought to have surpassed that of John D. Rockefeller. The technology developed by companies like Microsoft, Dell, and Apple led to a reduction in the size of computers, the speed and capabilities of computers, and the great fall in the price of each new generation of electronic device. The reduction in pricing allowed for more and more consumers to gain access to these devices, in an act that harkened back to the businesses, to the practices of Andrew Carnegie. Um, they set out to turn all luxuries into necessities, and Carnegie has said that capitalism is really all about turning luxuries into necessity. These men turned the computer, which was a luxury item in the 1980s and 1970s, into a necessity in the early 2000s and the 1990s. Now, the electronic industry, which conceived out of transforming the luxury status of the computer in 1999 to the most common handheld appliance. By the year 2000, every business had a computer, and most every household had a computer. By the 1990s, cellular telephones, cell phones, were becoming more and more a regular sight across the Republic. The cellular telephone was also a luxury item that came to be seen as indispensable by the mid 2000s. Now, the great disappointment of the 1990s had been the war on poverty, which had been one of the great objectives of the United States government. Now, since the 1960s, the government had been trying to eliminate poverty and close the growing achievement gaps between the American people. Now, though there had been an immense array of programs to prevent that from happening, the gap continued to grow. The seeming failure of the war on poverty programs and growing concerns regarding government welfare led to welfare reform in 1996. Between the 1960s, when the legislation had first been passed, and the 1990s, the illegitimacy rate had exploded, particularly in areas of low employment and high poverty. And we'll break here and we'll come back to that topic. We'll begin our next lecture, our final lecture really, with welfare reform in the mid-1990s. As always, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you thought about this lecture. And as always, I am Ted, and I will see you guys next time for another lecture.